Hello, I'm Rob, and this is another results tutorial. Hello, citizens of Westerosi, and welcome back this week as we toss some paint on our favorite sellsword of all, Sir Bronn. Starting off with the skin, using some Vallejo model color beige red. As always, remember to thin your paints down with some water or your favorite medium, and give your paints a little bit of time to dry before going back over the areas that you've already done. Now we're going to be adding some Vallejo Game Color Basic Skintone to the beige red, and we're going to start picking out the nose, the brow, the cheekbones, pretty much any of the higher areas of his face. And after that dries, using straight basic skin tone to further highlight. Remember that by doing the previous step, we will be keeping the highlights from being too stark from one color to the next. And it'll help it flow a lot better, and the miniature will look better overall for this. Next, we'll start cutting in the hair, and for that, I use some Vallejo Game Color Earth. Depending on the color you based your mini in, this could take a couple of layers. So I like to start any mini that will have brown hair with this color. I just like the way it comes out after you add some shade to it. How about you? What colors have you used, and which ones do you enjoy? Moving on to the top clothing area, and for that I'm going to be using some Vallejo UK Prussian Blue. This is a pretty good neutral light toned blue, as it's not too bright as say like a sky blue or electric blue. So we want to make sure we get down a couple decent coats of this, as this does take up a fair amount of the miniature and will draw a lot of focus. For the underclothing, I used Vallejo Model Air Dark Yellow. And to show you what not to do, I forgot to touch my brush to a paper towel to draw out the moisture before applying this paint. And so it took me a little bit longer than normal to get it done. So also do not forget to paint his elbows, as they are pretty easy to miss here, as it's just two tiny little sections. So for the chainmail, I thought I would use a new color I recently picked up, which is the Vallejo Game Color Chainmail. I'm used to using the Model Airline for my metallics, and those are pretty much watered down to the point that you don't need adding to them. And I think I added just a little bit too much water to this, and I forgot to draw out that moisture. Same thing I did in the previous step. And it shows horribly on his right arm. So, and no amount of me trying to fix this would get it done. So remember, touch your brush to a paper towel before you continue. Moving on to the gloves and the boots with some Vallejo Leather Brown. I kind of enjoy using leather brown here on the boots and the gloves, but alternatively you could choose to use, say, a flat brown and then highlight with this leather brown after you're done shading. For the pants, I'm using Vallejo Model Air Base Grey. I wanted something darker here, but not a black, and I really feel like this base gray fits that bill. Also, there's not a whole lot of territory for the pants, and I think using like black or German gray here would probably be just a little bit too much. Then moving on to the sword and the shield. For that, we'll be using some Vallejo Model Air Gun Gray. This is going to be the sword, and like I said, the shield, that center area of it, and also the pieces on the inside of the shield where he's holding it at, if you can reach them. So continuing with the shield, and for the wood sections of it, I used a 75-25 mix of Vallejo Model Color Flat Brown to Vallejo Model Air Wood. I wanted a darker brown here, but not something so dark that it would go into the black zone after I was done shading. The yellow from the wood color helps keep this slightly brighter. If I were to paint it again though, I would probably do more like a 50-50 mix of this. For the sheaths of the two short swords that he has on his back, for that I used a Camo Pale Brown. You might want to mix either a lighter or a darker color into this pale brown, so that these two items don't really flow into each other, as that'd be pretty easy because of their proximity. For the belt and any other straps that he has on him, I think the belt is pretty much it. For that, I used a Vallejo Game Color Charred Brown. And the belt is pretty much just showing on his back and going down the left side of his hip. And after that, it's on to the shading. And for this, I'll be using NULN oil, thinned down, with some thinner medium, and we're going to be doing this all over him with the exception of his face. Quick tip here, that if you use some flow improver or a thinning medium and just a little bit of water in your NULN oil, or any shades you use as that matter of fact, the shades will not want to collect on any of the flatter areas too much. They'll naturally roll into the recesses. You just have to remember to clean your brush off in some clean water and pick out that shade as it rests in some of the recessed areas, or else it'll get just a little bit too dark. And then for the face, we'll be using some Brighton Flesh Shade as normal. Then moving on to his clothing sections again, and for that, we'll be using some dark yellow again. Remember, we just want to pick out the higher areas, leave the recesses in shade. And then we'll add some Model Color Yellow Ochre to push that yellow just a little bit brighter, and start picking out some of those squares again. Try and leave some of the previous colors showing if you can, and hit the edges of the cloth with with an edge highlight. Then moving on to the gloves and the boots with some leather brown. Remember, we're just, as always, when we're highlighting, we're just picking out the top edges or anything facing upward that we are going to want highlighted. Then after that's done, we will add some filthy brown to our leather brown. I kind of like the filthy brown. It's orangish tint, and when you add it to the leather brown, it makes for a nice highlight color. Back to the shield with our original flat brown, wood brown mixture. And we're going to be picking out the top outside area of the shield and all around the inside as it goes around the metal section. Try not to get too far into the top or bottom of it. As always, we want to leave as much as we can showing the previous color, and just add some varying amounts of wood back to it to bring the color up. You'll notice he had some chips in his shield, and I totally forgot to hit those. And for that, you could just use a little bit of your straight wood color to clean that up, and it'll give it a lot of character. For the pants, we can just use the original Model Air Base Grey. We don't need to add any other highlight to this, as it pretty much stands out, and it's just a tiny section, and so trying to highlight it further, I think, would just really detract from the rest of the miniature. Now back to the outer clothing with our UK Prussian Blue, and highlighting up a little bit, and then after that we're going to be adding some blue azure to the mixture. Now when it comes to this, you're going to want to take your time, make sure your paints are nice and thin, that way you're kind of doing a little bit of a glaze over your previous color, and don't go overboard here, as any mistakes you make here are going to be super hard to correct. Also, you know, because this clothing takes up a vast majority of the miniature, and highlighting it too much will really detract from what you want people to look at, which is, you know, the head, the hair area. Now onto the metallics, and for that you can use some Model Air Steel, Model Air Silver, whichever one you prefer. It doesn't matter, they both pretty much look the same, honestly. So pick out the tops of the sword, bottom of the sword, leave the blood channel, you know, that center little dipped in section of the sword, in shade. You don't want to put any paint in there. It won't look right. And we're going to highlight the shield. You know, if you feel comfortable doing a little edge highlight between where the metal and the wood meets up, go for it. Pick out the metal rivets that hold that onto the wooden area, and the center of the metal. And onto the hair now, using some Vallejo Game Color Earth again. For this, you don't want your paints too thinned. If you are going to thin them, just make sure that you touch your brush to a paper towel before doing this. And you also are going to want a very fine detail brush, or, you know, a brush with a really nice tip here. So to do the hair, just pretty much give yourself a top-down view of the head and start making lines where you would expect hair to be, or where you want your hair to be, and work in a circle from outward from the crown. And for the highlights you're doing here, you're probably maybe 50% of it. And then finally you can add some khaki to this and do the same thing all over again, only taking up maybe 20% of the head. And here we go, guys. Bronn from Coal Mini or Nuts, Song of Fire and Ice strategy game. So despite the serious flaw at the beginning, messing up on the chainmail, overall I was rather satisfied with the way this miniature came out. So remember to like, subscribe, and share to help my channel grow. If you're interested in helping me determine what I paint and to help my channel further, you can head over to patreon.com and sign up there. I will also put a list of my paints that I use down on the bottom, as well as affiliate links to purchase them. And I want to thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next week.